A 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 went through the streets of Paris like a guided missile and then disappeared almost completely from public record the moment the cameras stopped rolling. A car this significant, this deliberately chosen, this visually iconic does not just vanish without a story worth telling, and that story has never been told correctly. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle. Buckle up, because this one goes deep. The Boss 429. What it actually was. Before we talk about John Wick, before we talk about the film, before we talk about what happened after production wrapped, we need to talk about what a Boss 429 actually is. Because if you don't understand the car, you don't understand why the choice to put one in this film was either an act of genuine automotive reverence or the most expensive flex in action movie history. Ford introduced the Boss 429 in 1969 for one reason and one reason only: homologation. NASCAR required that any engine used in competition had to be available in a street-legal production vehicle. Ford had developed the 429 cubic-inch semi-hemispherical V8 for track use, a genuinely exotic piece of engineering with canted valves, enormous ports, and a bottom end built to survive sustained high RPM abuse. To race it legally, they had to sell it. Ford produced approximately 859 Boss 429s in the 1969 model year. Just over 1,300 were built across both years the car was offered. To put that in context, Ford sold over 299,000 Mustangs in 1969 alone. The Boss 429 represented less than 1/3 of 1% of that total. This was not a car you accidentally stumbled into at your local dealership. This was a car you sought out, waited for, and paid serious money for at a time when serious money meant something different than it does now. The engine itself was not simply dropped into the Mustang's engine bay. It couldn't be. The 429 was physically too wide. Ford contracted Carcraft, an outside engineering firm in Brighton, Michigan, to perform the necessary modifications on every single car. The front suspension had to be relocated outward. The shock towers were moved. Each Boss 429 was essentially hand-modified before it left the factory, which is why the production numbers stayed low and why the price stayed high. These were not assembly line cars in any conventional sense. They were production vehicles built with racetrack logic applied to every decision. The factory rating was 375 horsepower, a number that every automotive journalist of the era treated with open skepticism. The general consensus then and now is that the actual output was somewhere north of 500 horsepower in stock form. Ford was deliberately underselling it to avoid insurance complications for buyers. Classic manufacturer behavior from that era. Tell the insurance companies 375. Tell the guys at the drag strip something else entirely. A genuine, documented matching numbers Boss 429 in excellent condition today sells for anywhere between $200,000 and $350,000 at auction, depending on provenance and condition. The ones with documented race history or celebrity ownership go higher, sometimes considerably higher. This is the car that the production team for John Wick. The film. Why this car? Why this story? Let's talk about John Wick Chapter 4 and why the Mustang is in it at all, because the car's presence in this film is not random. Nothing in the John Wick universe is random. And if you think Chad Stahelski is the kind of director who just points at a car and says that one looks cool, you have not been paying attention. The franchise has, from its very first entry, used cars as extensions of character in a way that most action franchises completely fail to do. Most action movies treat cars like set dressing. John Wick treats them like dialogue. Go back to the original film. John Wick drives a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. It gets destroyed in the opening act, and that destruction is not incidental. It is the entire point. The dog dies. The car dies. Everything Wick built for himself after he left the life gets taken in the same sequence. The car is not collateral damage. The car is the statement. You took everything from this man. Now, watch what happens. The car in Chapter 4 is not the same vehicle, but it carries the same emotional architecture. Wick, in exile, hunted, stripped of rank and resources and any realistic hope of survival, returns to action in a car from the same era. A car that was never really meant for the street at all. That distinction matters, and the filmmakers knew it mattered. The Mach 1 was the attainable Mustang. The one your neighbor could have saved up for? The one that showed up in high school parking lots and on Saturday night cruises and in the driveways of people who wanted performance without paying the full price of admission. The Boss 429 was something else entirely. Rarer, more expensive, less compromised, and built with a single purpose underneath all that sheet metal. If the Mach 1 represented Wick's first life, the life he tried to build and lost, then the Boss 429 is his last stand. The car he comes back in when coming back means something final. Stahelski has talked publicly about the intentionality behind every vehicle in these films. They are not pulling cars off a prop house list, they are casting them. The same conversation that happens about an actor happens about the car. What does this vehicle say about who this character is right now? What does it communicate before a single line of dialogue is spoken? The Boss 429 answers that question in about 4 seconds of engine noise. The Arc de Triomphe roundabout sequence, which is the centerpiece of the Paris Act and one of the more technically demanding car sequences put on screen in the last 10 years, was filmed over 9 consecutive nights on closed but real Paris streets. Wick runs the Mustang through oncoming traffic in continuous looping passes. He gets pursued, he gets shot at, he gets hit. The filmmakers built the sequence as a practical effects exercise first, meaning the car is actually there, actually moving, and the impacts you see on screen are not entirely the product of a visual effects pipeline. The car that goes through 9 nights of that carries weight, and a car that carries weight has a story worth following after the credits roll. The build, who made it and how. Here's where I need you to stop scrolling, stop half watching, and actually pay attention, because the build story on this car is one of the more remarkable things I've come across researching this channel. The production contracted with a Southern California build team to prepare the hero car and the stunt vehicles for Chapter 4. Multiple cars were built for the production, which is standard practice for any major action sequence. You do not put a one-of-one irreplaceable piece of American automotive history through a 9-night sequence on a Paris roundabout and hope for the best. You build multiples. You sacrifice the stunt cars, and you protect the hero. Here is the first complication. A genuine 1969 Boss 429 is, as I just explained, a rare and extremely valuable vehicle. The production did not gut an original. What they built for the hero car was a continuation vehicle, a period-correct body shell, sourced and prepared to represent the real thing on screen, but modified, reinforced, and in some cases re-engineered for the demands of the production. Under the hood of the hero car sat a supercharged modern V8, capable of producing output well in excess of what any stock Boss 429 ever delivered from the factory. The car had to be drivable by Keanu Reeves in actual moving sequences. It had to perform. It had to look right. It had to survive. The stunt cars were built to a different spec entirely. Lower-cost donor vehicles, period-correct body panels. The Arc de Triomphe work ate through vehicles. Multiple stunt cars were damaged beyond practical repair during the Paris shoot. That's not a criticism of anyone. That's what that sequence cost. You can see it on screen and you should appreciate it, because what you're watching actually happened. Now here's the detail that the internet keeps getting wrong, and I want to correct it directly. Multiple forums and comment sections have repeated the claim that Keanu Reeves personally owns or owned the hero Mustang from Chapter 4. He does not, as far as any documented record shows. Reeves has a genuine and well-documented relationship with cars. He co-founded Arch Motorcycle Company. He has spoken publicly about his personal collection. He is not performing enthusiasm for cameras, but ownership of a production vehicle and genuine enthusiasm for cars are 2 different things, and the film's hero car was a Lionsgate production asset, not a personal acquisition by its lead actor. That said, Reeves did drive it. The production team has confirmed that Reeves performed a significant portion of the driving work in the Paris sequences himself, a detail that becomes more remarkable when you understand what those sequences actually involved. Real impacts. A supercharged Mustang built to go fast with a man who genuinely knows how to drive one at the wheel. After the camera stopped, I'll be honest with you, the section of this story I'm about to get into is also the section that makes me want to put my head through a wall. Actually, not even through the wall, across the parking lot, and into the next building, because what happens to the John Wick Chapter 4? Mustang after production wraps is a story we have heard before on this channel, and it never gets less frustrating no matter how many times we tell it. Filming on Chapter 4 wrapped in the spring of 2022. The film sat in post-production for the better part of a year, released theatrically in March of 2023, and promptly delivered the strongest box office performance in the franchise's entire history. A film that Chad Stahelski himself has described as the most ambitious thing this franchise ever attempted. The biggest canvas, the longest shoot, the most cars destroyed in the name of practical filmmaking that any John Wick production had ever committed to. And in the months following that wrap, the hero Mustang and whatever stunt vehicles survived, the parachute entered the custody of Lionsgate's production asset management pipeline. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second. Production asset management pipeline. That is the language corporations use when they are talking about depreciation schedules and storage invoices and quarterly write-downs. It is not the language of preservation. It is not the language of legacy. It is the language of a filing cabinet. And movie cars that end up in filing cabinets have a survival rate that should make every person watching this channel genuinely angry. Here is what we can confirm. In the spring of 2023, timed to the theatrical release, Lionsgate organized a promotional campaign that placed several hero vehicles from the John Wick franchise on public display at select locations. The Mustang was part of that campaign. It showed up, it was photographed. Those photos exist. Some of them are still findable right now, if you know the right corners of the internet to look in. At that moment in time, spring of 2023, the Hero Mustang was confirmed intact, confirmed screen accurate, and confirmed in Lionsgate's direct custody. That is the last hard confirmation we have. After the promotional window closed, after the display events wrapped up, and the cars got loaded back onto transporters, the trail goes thin. And I have tracked enough of these stories to tell you exactly what a thin trail on a movie car usually means. It means one of three things, and none of them are particularly satisfying. The car went into studio storage, which is where movie cars go to be forgotten slowly, rather than all at once. Or the car was sold to a private collector who had no interest in publicizing the acquisition, which happens more often than the collector community likes to admit. Or the car was stripped of anything, with residual value, and disposed of in a way that nobody at the studio felt the need to announce, because studios do not issue press releases about the things they probably should not have done. The myth versus the reality. Now here is where the story takes a turn that is either encouraging or maddening, depending on how you look at it. And I genuinely cannot decide which one I feel. I have been going back and forth on this for 3 weeks, and I am no closer to a verdict, so I'm just going to lay it out and let you make up your own mind. The John Wick franchise has, over its run, built one of the more active and genuinely organized collector communities around any action franchise of its era. And I mean organized in a real sense, not just passionate, not just loud on the internet. Actually organized in the way that matters, which is people doing primary research, cross-referencing documents, and refusing to accept forum speculation as established fact. The memorabilia community around these films has been tracking production vehicles, props, wardrobe, and set pieces with a level of rigor that most franchise fan communities never come close to attempting. These are serious people doing serious work, and they deserve credit for it. And within that community, the Boss 429 from Chapter 4 has been a specific and sustained subject of discussion since before the film even had a release date. People were asking questions about this car while the parachute was still happening. That is how much weight this vehicle carried going into the film's release. What the community has been able to establish through cross-referencing production records, promotional documentation, and verified post-production sightings is that at least one vehicle connected to the John Wick Chapter 4 production entered the private collector market sometime in late 2023. What the community has not been able to establish with the kind of documentation that closes a case is exactly which vehicle that was, hero car or stunt car. Those are two very different things, and the distinction matters enormously, and I will get to that in a moment. The provenance chain from production through to private sale has gaps in it. The kind that serious collectors find uncomfortable and serious researchers find genuinely maddening. But here's the thing. That ambiguity is not unusual. The training day Monte Carlo went into private hands with an incomplete paper trail, and the lowrider community absorbed it quietly. The Dirty Mary Crazy Larry Charger sat in a Sun Valley backyard for decades, while the film became a cult classic around it. The SVT Lightning trucks from the first Fast and the Furious spent 20 years in the hands of owners who had no idea what they were sitting on, and one of them came within a single day of being parted out completely. The pattern is always the same. Major productions build extraordinary vehicles, use them with total commitment, and then manage them on the back end with the same administrative logic they apply to catering equipment and portable toilets. The car that carried the emotional and visual weight of $440 million of worldwide box office is, from a studio accounting perspective, a line item with a depreciation schedule. That is the reality, and it never stops being a genuinely stupid one. The auction trail and the cars that surfaced. Let me address something specific that has been circulating on collector forums and YouTube comment sections since around mid-2023. There is a black 1969 Mustang that has appeared at multiple car shows and private events billed as the John Wick Chapter 4 hero car. I have seen the photos. Some of you have sent them to me. The car looks correct. The build details are consistent with what was on screen. I am not going to tell you definitively that it is not the car, because I cannot verify that one way or another without documentation I do not currently have access to. What I will tell you is this: a production build that accurately recreates a Boss 429 to the spec used in this film is not a trivial undertaking. Someone who owns that car either built it for the film or built it because they love the film, and either way they clearly know what they're doing. If you have documentary evidence that ties a specific VIN or a specific build to the production, the comments are open, and I mean that seriously. What I can tell you with confidence is that a car appearing at show events without documentation, without a provenance chain that runs cleanly back to the Lionsgate production, is not definitively the hero car. It might be a surviving stunt vehicle. It might be a post-production build made to the same spec. The John Wick collector community has enough momentum now that both scenarios are entirely plausible, and the distinction matters enormously if that car ever crosses an auction block. A verified, documented hero car from this production, given the franchise's box office history and the cultural weight of the Chapter 4 Paris sequence, would realistically clear $300,000 at Barrett-Jackson. Maybe more. Provenance is everything in this market. A car that might be the one from the film is worth significantly less than a car that demonstrably is. Where it is now. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about the Boss 429 from John Wick, Chapter 4. And bear with me here, because this is the part where I stop being a car researcher and start being a person who finds this stuff genuinely moving, which I realize is a slightly embarrassing thing to admit on a car channel. But here we are. The 1969 Boss 429 was built for a purpose that had nothing to do with the street. It was built to go racing. Ford built it, Carcraft modified it, and then the homologation rules required that it be sold to ordinary buyers who drove it on ordinary roads toward ordinary lives. The racing purpose was always underneath it, always present, never fully expressed in the context it was designed for. John Wick drives that car through Paris, not as a collector, not as an enthusiast, but as a man with a very specific and very violent job to do. The car is doing what it was actually built for finally, half a century later, in a completely fictional context. There's something in that. A car built for a race that never happened, driven by a character fighting a war he cannot win, in a city that agreed to close its streets for 9 nights, so a filmmaker could get the shot right. That is either the most romantic thing I have ever said about a Mustang, or an indication that I need to get outside more. Possibly both. Where does this leave us? One hero car, confirmed in Lionsgate custody through the spring of 2023, current location privately held or in studio storage based on available documentation. Multiple stunt cars, at least 2 damaged beyond restoration during the Paris shoot. Fate of any survivors unknown without additional documentation. A collector community actively tracking the vehicle with more organizational capacity than the studio appears to have applied to preserving it. And somewhere, right now, A voodoo black 1969 Mustang Boss 429 built to chase a man through Paris is either sitting in a climate-controlled storage unit, parked in someone's private collection, on display at an event that nobody properly documented, or waiting to be found by someone who cares enough to go looking. If you have a credible lead, you know where to find me. The comments are open. The channel is watching. The Boss 429 deserved better than this. It deserved a curator, a provenance chain, a glass case with a placard that told the whole story. What it got instead was the same treatment Hollywood has given remarkable vehicles since the beginning. Used completely, documented partially, and released into the world with no one watching. That pattern does not change until enough people care enough to demand something different. And the fact that you watched this entire video suggests you might be one of those people. Subscribe to American Muscle if you haven't already, because the next one goes somewhere you are not expecting. We trace the cars that history forgot, and the people stubborn enough to go find them. See you in the next lane.